Hello and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Maryam Zia. Pakistan's economy is on the path of recovery after a number of challenges which included high inflation rates. And when we talk about the recent bold initiatives by the government like Uran Pakistan initiative, we are of course foreseeing and expecting a number of investment opportunities in Pakistan. And when we look at the global data, of course, World Bank's recent reports suggest and is projecting that Pakistan's economy would be standing at $1 trillion by the year 2035. Of course, this is a positive outlook, but there are a number of challenges as well. With the support of IMF, Pakistan is moving forward, and of course, there is a lot of global interest in Pakistan's investment initiatives. But are these for long term? We will be discussing in today's program. When we talk about Pakistan's economic revival, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that lie ahead? To discuss this and more, we are joined online by Dr. Usman Chohan, who is advisor on economy to CASS. Welcome to the program. We are also joined by Dr. Aima Mehdi, who is economist. Welcome to the program. Dr. Aima, let me start with you. Of course, when we look at these projections by World Bank, that Pakistan's economy is going to be standing at $1 trillion by year 2035. How realistic are these expectations and projections?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for putting up such a brilliant question. I have no doubts about Pakistan's economy having the ability to stand at $1 trillion by 2035. But there's a big caveat underlying this number that IMF has or the World Bank has projected. There are a few things. So we have a decade now, from now on to 2035, to achieve our targets. So if one by one we target all our issues nicely and in a systematic manner, I have no doubt that we'll be able to get to the 1 trillion mark. And if it's not 1 trillion, it will be near around in the same ballpark. There are a few things that we must address by then. So the first issue that Pakistan really has been struggling with since the last 2 to 3 decades, and that issue is about the circular debt. It's reached its all-time high. So recently there has been outside by the finance minister that we'll have a rollover, and we'll be raising an X amount of money from sales tax, and we'll be raising X amount of money by the competition that we're bringing in the gas market. That's correct. We are on the track for that. But however, if we are getting into sales tax, we now have to get into the correct way of collecting that sales tax. For example, through technology, the technology that we are going to bring into collecting our sales tax, for example, through point of sale system, that is going to bring a positive impact in how we collect taxes, and that will also employ our youth into things like information technology, into programming, into the sector of computing, and it's going to generate more employment. So it's going to be beneficial in every way, and we'll be able to bring everyone in the tax net and increase our sales tax. At the same time, we're bringing in competition into the gas sector, which is amazing. All the advanced countries, all the advanced economies, they do the same thing. It's not to be a nationalized asset. The distribution sector, the supply sector of gas must be a private sector entity, and there must be open tenders, and companies should be able to break this natural monopoly of gas, because gas sector is a natural monopoly, and the distribution sector is an amazing sector where we can bring in positive competition, we can break this monopoly, we can increase the supply mechanism, we can increase the profit margins for the company, and through those profit margins we can enhance the tax collection of the gas sector, and that's a brilliant mechanism to collect more taxes and get rid of the circular debt. Secondly, another problem that our country really sadly faces is population. So there's, we haven't been wrong. The World Health Organization program hasn't been wrong, but there has been something else that we have deferred for years and years, and that has been the influx of people coming in from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh, from various Asian countries where there has been disputes, and our backbone has been broken by the the tough bulk of illegal migrants that have come into the country. However, we're tackling it, we're settling down with it. So we must make very viable changes in our system which reduce population base, because we are a poor country, highly indebted. We don't need to have children that we can't educate, we can't provide for, and we don't have health care. The third thing that I want to come across is that Pakistan has one of the lowest labor productivity in the world. And here in the world, I mean, I'm comparing Pakistan to the countries in Africa, countries you might not even have heard the names about. So now is the time. Pakistan is one of the luckiest countries in the world. We have a great amount of youth, we have a lot of children, and if we put them on the
Very
right track
pertinent
through
points
education.
raised by you, very pertinent points raised by you, Dr. Aima, and we will be discussing when we talk about the challenges. But let's talk about the opportunities and this projection by World Bank. And let me bring in Dr. Chohan into the discussion. Dr. Chohan, what's your take on this, especially when the World Bank is saying that Pakistan could have a $1 trillion economy by year 2035, but it has some implications. In your opinion, what are some of the sectors we need to focus on at this point in time with regards to, of course, the growth should be 7% each year till 2035?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. Very nice to be here. You know, it's funny, this $1 trillion target, ironically, Pakistan has already met. As our finance minister said a few months ago, if you add our formal and informal sectors, we exceed $1 trillion now. That's not my opinion. He's on the record saying that. And I think there's some truth to that, because when you measure our economy, the taxable, formal, structured part of it is about a little less than $400 billion. But if you look at the size of your informal economy, well, first of all, it's impossible to measure, but you can estimate, and it's probably pretty big. So can we have a $1 trillion economy? Yeah, you already do. But the real question is, do you want to have a $1 trillion formal economy? And for that, yes, there are multiple sectors to work on. But my argument, again, would be the best way to go about it is to formalize your informal sector, and you'll probably be at $1 trillion already, because you are at 250 million people. So you're already like at a very big stage. I know half of the population is below a certain age group and so on, but you are already a very productive and dynamic country. It's just that you have to work around the formal structures to survive. So a lot of work is being done by our government right now in terms of digitization, in terms of the National Digital Pakistan Act, which was just passed. These sorts of things help to formalize things and digitize them, so then it's hard to be outside of the grid. So I think that there's a strong case that getting to $1 trillion even formally will happen, not because you expand too much in sectors beyond what you have, but rather that you simply formalize what you have, and you already got $1 trillion right there.
Right, right. But we have been stuck in some of the past struggles and cyclic crises. What's your take on that, and how to move forward, keeping in mind the context of those?
Yes. The point is that our growth is cyclical. That means that you have ups and downs, and they happen in 5 to 7 year periods. And we've seen a tough time recently. But the fact is that our structure economically is cyclical because it is driven by imports and consumption. So 92% of your GDP is essentially consumption. That's because you can have more than 100% because you have negative numbers in there, right? So it's exports minus imports, for example, and you're negative on that. And imports also. So what governments have done for the past 50 years is that they stimulate the economy, they heat it up, and then you have a lot of consumption, and it's on borrowed money, and a lot of it is then gone remitted outwards to have imports in here. And the investment rate itself, which is another part of GDP, is very low, and it's actually shrinking as a percentage of GDP. So the shortcut to that is just shrink your GDP and you'll have a high investment rate. But I think there's a more productive way to go about this. And Doc Saiba said it correctly, which is that you have to increase the labor productivity, because that's why you also have the lowest among the lowest wages in the world. So making your labor force productive is very, very important, and investment in that, both from the private and public sector, which means deferred consumption for future growth through capital investments, that drives GDP at a more sustainable and acyclical way. Otherwise, you will continually go through these booms and busts, and it's hard for people, it's hard for companies to adapt. It's hard for any entity to plan. And that's why you want to minimize the cyclicality, and you want to be involved and integrated into the global economy, but you want to have a counter cyclical economy. So when everybody else is down, you're up. And when everybody is up, you're all right. That's what you're aiming for. Investment is the way to go about that rather than have a consumption driven economy.
Right, and talking about investments, of course, Dr. Aima, I want your comment on the recently launched Iran-Pakistan program. Of course, this is very ambitious and has set ambitious goals, including a 6% GDP growth by 2028. Given Pakistan's GDP growth, it has been traditionally, we know it has been volatile. Do you think what kind of measures are needed, or is this an appropriate blueprint in this regard?
Thank you for this. So, let me begin by explaining a bit about GDP and Pakistan GDP. Let's just look at the last 5 years. So we haven't been volatile in our GDP growth. We have been very consistent to keep our GDP growth between 0 and 1%. And very sadly, I was looking at one of the matrices just yesterday, and that website is one of the most renowned, but I don't want to highlight it here. But they clearly they round off the numbers, and they clearly said that the GDP growth for Pakistan between 23 to 24 was 0%. They don't even round it to 0.5%. And where does GDP growth come from? It comes from your labor productivity. It comes from technology. If you've had a breakthrough in entrepreneurship, or if you've had like a natural resource, or if you've had like market economies where you're exporting such and such stuff and you have a lot of reserves. So we've had a nullified effect on all of these factors, right? Getting a GDP growth of 6 7.5% by 2028 is nothing less than a joke, unless and until we really get to a point where we reduce our consumption, we reduce our irrelevant expenditures, and we focus everything on industries, on exports, on technology, on labor skills, vocational schools, etc. However, having said that, it's not all that bleak. Iran, Pakistan. I mean, I have a very balanced approach towards that. It's good. We're funding new ventures. We're going to fund new ideas. That is perfectly fine. However, the only thing I see lacking is how well everything is kept consistent. The atmosphere is kept consistent. The political dynamics are kept consistent. The policies are kept consistent, and people who are investing, entrepreneurs who are investing, foreign investment that we're getting are given a very secure, safe, and a consistently well healthy environment where they can actually boom. So for right now, if we look at a small marginal effect of like the interest rates, our stock market KSE has been going down since mid last week till now. It's gone down by 100 bips or so. So the effect is that a lot of things have been taken in by the markets, have been psychologically they're absorbed. So we were very very happy with how the stock market was performing, for example. Okay, and we're very happy with how interest rates would come down, but we have to have a consistent manner to now take things from this point A to a point B, where we have a formal 1 trillion economy, where we have a 6 to 7% GDP growth. So we need to take a consistent
Right.
path.
And what specific measures are required for that to keep that sustainability, especially long-term sustainability in this regard, Dr. Aima?
So the one and the most important thing is to have very thorough structural reforms. And by that, I mean, if X government makes such and such laws, like for example, we're going to have free electricity for technology zone and IT areas, that needs to stay that way, even if the political party changes. Whatever happens, we need to have that buffer where we inculcate and we incubate an environment where that technology sector will flourish, Once that flourish and we get to a point where we have a competitive edge, where we're doing really well on that, then that's our plus point. The other thing is that we need to see is how well we are investing or saving in the economy. A country that wants to grow cannot grow on a consumption based economy. There must be investments and savings. People need to be incentivized for investing and gaining profits from there, or getting a business return, etc., because that way you generate employment. When you generate employment, you're producing, and then you're exporting, and your reserves are going up. So that is a way, like, you need to incentivize people to have industries. Could be anything, big, small, whatever it is, but you need to incentivize people and have like a very thorough scenario where such things can actually grow. The third most important thing is we need to sort out our energy crisis. Right, we have electricity and gas crisis in Pakistan. I'm really happy with this, competition coming in the gas market. We need to sort this out, and we need to see how we are self-sufficient in our gas supply, electricity supply, in our locational marginal pricing, in our standing charges, in our technology, because that is the backbone for any industry. And lastly, what I would like to say is that education, you know, educated people, educated class, educating people. If you start educating children at a very low level, if you have schools in villages that have quality education, and everyone's in the education cycle, that's one way that you can really, really enhance the productivity of your economy, economic growth. That's the basis. Unless and until you don't educate people with the skills that they need, even if they're basic skills, they're very necessary. And
Right,
I
right.
think the amount of money we're spending in the budget to education is really low. So I think that's one sector that we really need to look into.
Right, that is very important. But Dr. Chohan, coming back to inflation in Pakistan, when we look at the figures, it peaked in 2023 and then it makes some strides. In the year, of course, 2025, it decreased to 4.1%. How sustainable, in your opinion, is this downward trend? And what fiscal policies or structural reforms are needed, in your opinion, like Dr. Aima also alluded to earlier?
Well, this is a very deep question when you talk about the fiscal nature of inflation, because inflation is seen as a monetary phenomena, at least among right-wing economists. So the point is that inflation was very, very high, as you mentioned correctly, 22, 23, and then the first half of 2024. But it's been coming down. And that's because inflation is a period on period change being measured. So it's only gone up 4% in the last reading relative to the reading that happened previously, which was an astronomical number. It was like 30%, up to 40% at one point. And so being 4% higher still means that it's going above that by 4%. So inflation alone is not the best way to understand this. The best way to understand this is cost of living. And so inflation, even if it's at 0%, it's still at a very high level because the cost of living is very high for people to be able to afford their basic stuff. And in Pakistan, we are a resilient people, so we've managed through this. But in other countries, governments have fallen. There's a huge wave of change around the world, and the main cause was either, they were very unhappy with the politics, specifically things like how their country might be supporting Israel or something. That's one factor, but a bigger factor was that it's simply a cost of living issue. Now for us, the cost of living issue is still a big deal. The austerity program that we have concluded with the IMF and are implementing right now, and which shall be reviewed next month, is actually very difficult for people to be burdened with and saddled with. So the reason we don't talk about cost of living as much in economics is because that is actually a political issue, just like fiscal policy is a political issue, as opposed to monetary, which a state bank or a reserve bank being independent should manage on its own in a technical manner. But fiscal policy becomes very, very tricky because the more you try to ease the burden of the people, the more you may run into deficits whose accumulation then becomes like a debt problem. So supporting the people is important, but that has to be bolstered with tax revenues. And so what you need is balance in fiscal policy. And you also need balance in monetary policy. As you see, our interest rates are still double digits, even though inflation has been single digit readings for the last 6 months. So finding the balance has been hard for all countries. Pakistan has done a pretty good job, but the credit goes as much to the people and their endurance as much as to the government and its sound management. The central bank has done a pretty good job, but I think they should be more aggressive when things are good to ease the lives of people, and then more restrictive when times get hard. So this is the balance seeking question where fiscal being political and monetary being technical both have to work together side by side to make sure inflation works out to be a low figure and cost of living particularly ends up being a much easier figure.
Of course, and that is important for the common citizen and for the common class. But Dr. Aima, coming back to foreign exchange reserves that we have for now, we have increased foreign exchange reserves and now cover over 2 months of imports. Given the heavy reliance of on external debt, how do you assess Pakistan's capacity to manage these reserves?
So the last figure I saw was around $13 billion, and Dr. Chohan can correct me over that if it's changed, but I think it's 13 billion. Thank you, Dr. Chohan. Within these $13 billion, very interesting. Pakistan has a very, very interesting and one of its kind sort of a treasury structure. In these 13 billion, we have like 3 billion from the Saudi, which they keep rolling over. We have some money from China, and then we're looking to borrowing from the commercial sector, and we are also looking to get the next tranche from the IMF, and that's how we are going to keep it at $13 billion. However, your question is about the import cover. I think for a healthy, like economically, and for like a healthy level of reserves, we must have around 4 to 5 months of imports cover. Also, we might not have an official ban on imports, but somewhere inside we do have a ban on imports, and we cannot openly import a lot of things. And industry in particular is having trouble importing a lot of things, which I think is fine unless until it is entirely necessary to import things as a raw material. It is fine, and because in the past our economy has been getting into trouble because of high imports, and then getting into trouble keeping our balance of payment in balance, so which is fine, and it has also given a lot of opportunities to the local entrepreneurs and local industry. For example, a lot of cosmetic industries have come up, a lot of apparels, hosiery, and people have been inclined more towards buying things that are locally produced in Pakistan. So I think I see it personally, I see it as a positive thing for the country, because we are getting a lot of talent from within Pakistan, and it's a really good thing. However, to maintain the reserves, it's a tricky thing, because for like in the next 6 months, the mid of 2025, I do see that the balance of payment reserve is going to be a bit tricky, and it might go into a deficit again if it's not tied up properly. So that's an issue over there. However, with the debt, I mean, we're reaching a very phenomenal number of like 1 trillion rupees, 1.6, I think it's 1.6 trillion rupees of external debt, and we want to roll over more than half of it. And we've said that we're going to raise money through sales tax, and the taxes we're going to raise through gas market. But it's still I would say it's a tricky target to achieve, but it's achievable. But again, we have to stick to our policies, and reserves is everything that needs to be done in the country has to be done keeping in account that our reserves position is volatile, and it's also tricky, and we have to balance it somehow. It's a real balance. So let's see how we go. But my hopes are high, and I really hope that we can get some foreign investment in the stock market, for example, something in the technology sector and the apparel hosiery sector. And if we can get these three things, we might be able to pull on for 2025 at least. Yeah.
Right, right. And Dr. Chohan, we know that IMF's extended fund facility has played an important role when we talk about stabilization of economy in Pakistan. How have the conditions tied to these facilities, of course, impacted the country's fiscal sovereignty, in your opinion?
You've picked a very important word, a very tricky, dicey word, sovereignty. Well, the fact that we go to the IMF means that the policies are determined, at least in concert with the IMF. Some would say they're determined directly by the IMF, and then you forsake your sovereignty. You have in fact capitulated when you do that, and therefore you cannot be a sovereign nation when you have to take diktat from a technical organization which has its own politics, which has its own agenda, and that agenda changes with the decades depending on what type of ideology is run by the people on that side. For example, in the 80s, it was very free market neoliberal stuff. Then they've come out and to realize that it was a pretty stupid idea, that kind of thing. So sovereignty is something that is inherently compromised by the intrusion of institutions from outside, naturally. But how severe are the impacts matters most in terms of public value and public disvalue. That means that the people have suffered a lot. For example, the taxes on the salary class, like you draw a salary, I draw a salary. People like us have been disproportionately affected, but not all sectors are being equally or fairly covered in terms of paying their due share. So it seems like some people get uh, preferential treatment, some institutions, some organizations, some private players get preferential treatment, and that's simply unfair. It's not a good foundation for a tax system in terms of the principles of taxation. So what we want is more balance in that sense too, where everybody is treated fairly. Otherwise, IMF conditionalities, in order to meet them, there's always some people you can always pick on, such as, decent salary folk, to meet part of the target rather than doing it in a comprehensive manner. That's what happens in austerity generally. And you cannot grow yourself as an economy when you have an austerity paradigm. That austerity paradigm is imposed by the IMF. And there is a reason, there's a sensible reason why the IMF says that, because it looks at the way your federal budget works and how there's so many holes in it, particularly what goes immediately to the provinces, no question asked, and then all of these other things that come into the structure of the federal budget, and says, well, you got to do something about this in terms of balancing it out. And to find that sort of balance isn't easy from a political perspective, but if you can't deal with your vested interests, then you'll simply have their interests play out over the longer run, and then the rest of us struggle because of that. So there is a real world implication of having an austerity program imposed from abroad, and then the manner in which it's implemented. There are better ways to do an IMF program.
Right. And
We keep moving.
right, and Dr. Chohan, we have discussed those ways a number of times in our show. But in your opinion, at this point in time, what kind of adjustments can Pakistan make to reduce its reliance on IMF?
As long as you can have a decent import cover, as Doc Saiba mentioned, as long as you have a broad enough tax base, as long as you have a reasonable labor productivity, as long as your exports are significant and they keep growing, as long as you can cover the food security requirements of your people, as long as you don't have spiraling micro debt regions such as energy, you'll be fine. But as I just mentioned, that's about 6 things that you got to deal with to start with.
Right, right. And Dr. Aima, when we look at the global picture and the global instability, the 2024 IMF report highlighted the risks that are proposed by external factors such as geopolitical tensions and climate-related events. How vulnerable is Pakistan in this regard?
I think it's really unfortunate for Pakistan for not producing much of the carbon footprint, but at the same time, it has to face the consequences of that carbon footprint in general, global warming and changes due to pollution, etc. So Pakistan has had like flash flooding, it has had drought, and for example, right in the month of January, you'll see it's been a very, very dry winter, and then as soon as it's the harvesting time, we'll have flash flooding, rains, we're going to have hail, and our crops are going to be destructed. So I think that's a real challenge. And on COP, one of the COP meetings, our premiership has not been able to successfully get the funding that we need, and we do not have a. And on top of the funding, we do not have a roadmap. We do not have like classified people, or even if we do have classified people, we don't have the execution of policies that will safeguard the people and food security and export of rice and wheat, etc., that we have been exporting in the past. We've had a very good export of wheat and wheat crop and sugar cane to rice to mangoes. They've been world famous, but because our crop has been down the hill, we haven't been able to do so. So right now we have a severe lack of execution of policies that will safeguard our economy, our people, our farmers from the global destruction due to global warming, etc. And also the geopolitical. We've had like major geopolitical issues, and I think with Trump's premiership, the whole global environment with war in Gaza and all these things going on, Ukraine, there's a potential challenge not just for Pakistan but also the major economies in the world, and they're factoring in these things when it comes to economic planning, when it comes to planning for their natural resources. So I don't see or haven't gone through any legal political way of how our government wants to stay through these things. So for example, we went to the double strike facility, and US was very vigilant in how Belarus and China were warned against not letting Pakistan do so, and it also really connects to the sovereignty issue that you just mentioned. So I think Pakistan is at the center. We're facing Afghanistan on one side, and we have issues with India, and then China luckily is aiding us. So these are the kind of things that we really need to stay through very quickly. And the other point that I want to touch upon right now is like Trump's premiership, and he wanted to reduce the policy rates, for example, but the Fed hasn't done so in the last meeting, just thinking that inflation globally might go up. If inflation in the US goes up, the world will follow. So the inflationary mark that our government is really relying upon is a soft point that we are tackling on, and it might not sustain for a very long time, and we don't know what side of global changes, political changes we are looking towards. And I don't know how our premiership is factoring in these things in steering the economy, in making the future political and economic plans. So these are things we really need to be vigilant upon.
Right, right. And I want to touch upon a point that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Aima, that is about the significance of agricultural sector, and of course it is directly tied to climate change as well. And when we look at the figures in terms of agriculture, Pakistan has recorded a growth of 6.25% with key crops like cotton and rice seeing significant increases. So in your opinion, what type of long-term strategies are needed at this point in time to sustain and build the growth in agricultural sector?
So we had a one-off bumper crop. That was a one-off natural positive side that we saw, but we don't have a very strong way of incentivizing our farmers. For example, when we've got like a wheat harvest, the market rates, I remember 6 months before, and it's going to happen soon again, approaching summers. We had issues where farmers didn't want to sell. They were hoarding crops because the market rate was below what they had been spending. So these figures I will have to recheck really. I'm aware about one bumper crop that we had, but I think the way we incentivize our farmers, the way we import our fertilizers, the way our water table is going down. So Pakistan has one of the countries where the water table has been going really down. So the irrigation system that we have in Punjab, central Punjab, the end of Punjab where we touch Sindh, where we've had wonderful crops of mangoes and stuff, the water table has been going down. We've had issues with rainfall, and then we also have a big issue of water siltation, which is really affecting the type of crop we are growing. So in the past, we have been self-sufficient with the amount of tomatoes and onions we've had, but now we have to import like simple staple products, and that is also a suppression on our current account balance really. So if we need to be self-sufficient in feeding the world's fifth largest population, and we are not, sadly we're not self-sufficient. So we need to first see, do we have enough food to feed our own people? Last year there was a report by World Food Authority around March, April, and it said that we do not have enough wheat. We import our wheat. So we used to export wheat at some point, and we don't have enough wheat to feed our own population. So that's an issue, and we need to have a market-based mechanism where we set our wheat prices. So that has to be come in place, and then we always have sugar issues. We have issues with the kind of cows we have in the milk production. So if we channelize our farmers, if we give them basic education, which I'm sure we do have Kisan programs where we have the green books for the farmers, and they can take small level of loans. But if we do it on a mass level where we incentivize them and we give them the subsidies that they need, and deal with this water siltation and water table problems because of the growth of housing societies and deforestation, I think we can do great on that front.
Right, right. And Dr. Chohan, let's move towards some of the opportunities. And when we talk about opportunities, IT sector remains very significant for Pakistan. And when we look at the figures, it has shown impressive growth of 28% year on year. What steps, in your opinion, should the government take to foster and further growth in this sector? And also when we talk about digitalization and keeping in mind the youth bulge in the country.
Absolutely. IT is a very, very promising sector, and we have a lot of talent in Pakistan working on IT. There's no question. But it isn't being made easy for them to do their work. The sorts of internet bandwidth issues, and you're well familiar with what those have been a nightmare for the IT industry by their own admission. They have been, publishing about it. They talk in the newspapers about it, that they're having a very hard time even accessing, and therefore they miss deadlines at times. They have to produce substandard stuff just because it wasn't done on time or they didn't have enough access to what they needed. And this automatically hemorrhages their ability to add further value. That's one problem. The second is that freelancing industry is basically filling in gaps in the value chain for a very low cost. But as you have things coming like AI in the new version, this DeepSeek and all that is out now too. So AI hardware is getting cheaper and it will be able to do a lot of the stuff that freelancers actually charge money to do. So the value added in this becomes very dubious. And I'm very, very worried for our freelancers because as AI can solve the problems that they charge for free, then we are in a lot of trouble. So we have to look at the structure of IT itself and what value can be added in something that is essentially digital, decentralized, spread all over. You have problems with that. So what can be done for the IT people? Well, they have to upgrade to further value added stuff. The participation in AI particularly is not as large, or even in crypto is not as large as it should be. I mean to say cutting edge stuff, whereas other countries are becoming extremely competitive about this stuff. You're familiar with the 500 billion that's been announced in the US to make it the center for AI, the Stargate program. Like, people are putting a lot of money and a lot of energy behind this stuff, and there is an arms race in AI that has begun. Where are our freelancers in this? Well, they're sort of like the algae floating over the ocean, but it's important for us, because we are a big country with a lot of talented people, sophisticated IT people, to be able to move the currents themselves in a way that creates value and helps our people to generate good incomes and sustainable incomes. So there's a lot to be talked about on that front.
Of course, and Pakistan needs to leverage that as well. Dr. Aima, there is a lot of surge we are witnessing when we talk about foreign direct investment. Do you think this is a positive sign for Pakistan's economic prospects? And what policies should Pakistan be adopting for long-term goals, not short-term goals, when we talk about sustainability of economic revival?
FDIs, foreign direct investments, are a good omen, I would say, for any economy if it's looking to grow. So it can never, almost never go wrong. So it's a good thing. But some of the things that really have to be sought in for a country like Pakistan is, one, security. Security has been an issue for companies in the past, and security is one issue why a lot of investors have been hesitant. So if they want to physically come and invest and make a big IT hub, for example, or potentially setting up a, like an industry for building hardware, etc., whatever, security is an issue. So we have to provide them physical security, that people, when coming to Pakistan, have to feel safe and secure and confident that we're going to a very safe country. So that's one thing. The second thing that we really need to do is to have like special economic zones where such entities act and execute their investments, and they carry on their activities as normal as usual. We need to have competitive energy pricing. We need to get rid of the spiral of this pricing, debt, etc. We need to ensure that we are giving them the energy, gas, electricity, whatever it is, in a streamlined manner, in a streamlined way, and we do that. The fourth thing is taxation. Taxation has been an issue in Pakistan, and because a lot of investors do know that we are in an IMF extended fund facility, and that requires us to increase our tax net, because we fell like 5% short in the revenue collection, and we were only meant to be like not even 1%, but we like 5% short of that tax collection, and that becomes an uncertainty, and that doesn't really help bringing in FDI. So we need to see how we regulate our taxation regimes, how well we maneuver our taxation regimes, and we ensure that the taxation regimes are streamlined and they are consistent with when the businesses come in, execute, and when they want to exit. Another important point for FDIs
Right.
is economic policy uncertainty. So Pakistan's economic policy uncertainty index stands on one of the highest as anything else. So we need to provide them policy certainty. Like for example, if you're coming here, you can operate for the next 10 years under the same circumstances. And lastly, the thing is, and I do see a pressure on the currency. So we need to see how we really safeguard the pricing of the PKR in the world market, and how we stop it from being depreciated. And that is one thing that has really repelled foreign investment in Pakistan. We need to ensure that our currency is stable and secure. So if we continue doing these things, I'm sure we can attract a lot of foreign capital directly or indirectly through other companies into the country and generate employment. So that will be a good thing.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Aima Mehdi, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, for joining us in today's program. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Thank you for joining.